I will turn it over to Ms. Phyllis.
Thank you. Tonight's budget workshop, we will be discussing the general fund for the fiscal year 2019-2020. We'll start off with the revenues. The first line item that we'll be discussing is the property taxes. The property taxes are estimated to be around $7.8 million for the fiscal year for 1920, and that's calculated by taking the assessed values, the most recent assessed values, and multiplying it by our current tax rate. In the next 8 line items are basically just estimates of delinquent property taxes that we anticipate collecting. We anticipate collecting about $25,000 more on the 18-19, and then of course the prior year to that $10,000, and $3,000, $1,500, and on down. As the years get older, we don't expect to collect as much property tax there. The next line item is the interest and penalties and court costs associated with property taxes. Looking at prior year's trends, we're anticipating approximately $30,000. And please stop me at any time if you need to ask a question. For the next line item is the payments in lieu of taxes, which is mostly utility type businesses. And we've estimated about 120. Last year we came, 17-18, we came in a little bit low. I forecasted out to be around 114, so I felt like we needed to take that budget down just a little bit to 120 based on the prior year and the current year's forecast. Next is payment in lieu of taxes, TVA. We're pretty consistent with around 420 a year, so we anticipate the budget to be 420,000 for 1920. Local sales tax, we came in around $8 million last year. We're going to come in probably somewhere around 8.1, 8.2 this year. Just to be on the conservative side, we budgeted $8 million for 1920. Wholesale alcohol and beverage tax, it's pretty small amount. We anticipate $3,500 for that. The wholesale beer tax, pretty consistent each year, around $470, $480. So we budgeted $470 for that line item. The wholesale liquor tax, pretty consistent each year, somewhere around $160 to $180. So we're budgeting about $160 for that. Civil penalties, beer permits, we haven't been collecting many of those, so I took the budget down over prior year down to $500 just in case we do have some of those revenues come in. The business tax, looking at prior year, we came in about 1.2 million. Current forecast is about 1.1, so budgeted at $1.1 million. Business license, small amount. We budgeted about $3,000 there. For the Comcast cable TV franchise, that's pretty consistent, around $280,000 a year. The franchise fees for AT&T, pretty consistent, around $9,000 or $10,000. We budgeted $10,000. Cable TV franchise for Tennessee Telephone, it's pretty consistent in the 80s, so we budgeted $85,000 for next year. Hotel motel tax, pretty consistent over the prior years, so we're budgeting at $82,000. The next group of revenues is our permits. So for our beer license application fees, we are budgeting $500. It kind of looks like we're forecasting a little low this year, and I want to not over budget for revenues on that line item. Liquor application fees, kind of low there, budgeted $500. Liquor license privilege tax restaurant, we came in pretty good last year, forecasting about $1,550 this year, so I estimated the budget to be about $1,500 for 2019-20. Building permits, we just never really know about these. but it looks like we've been pretty consistent in the last few years to be privileged to, you know, be collecting around 280 and 260. So we kind of average that out to about 260. Building permits, we're up in all over the place on that one, so I budgeted 25. Last year we collected 31, the year before 29. This year it looks like about 23, so I kind of split it in the middle there and budgeted 25,000. Mechanical permits, we're averaging somewhere around 20, some years more, some years less. Plan review fees, we've had some pretty good years up until last year, up until 17-18. So I split that and budgeted at 35,000. Inspection fees or minimum fees, $400 budgeted for 19-20. Other permits, we came in about 41.9 last year, about 68 the year, 41.9 for forecast, about 68 the year before. Didn't want to budget too high because these kind of go up and down, so I budgeted 40,000. For the state revenue, we do get some reimbursement from the DEA on overtime, so it runs about 8,000, so we budgeted 8,000. Some years a little more, some years a little less, just according to what kind of a grant they give us. Fire training reimbursement and the police training reimbursement, those are based on however many officers have went through their required training, and they reimburse the officers. I think it's right at $600 per officer, and we pay that back to the officers and the firemen through payroll. For the fire, we're estimating about 25,000. For police, about 32. For the state sales tax, looks like we're going to come in about 2.9 million. We were a little bit low last year at 2.8, and the reason I increased it to 2.9 is because we have a full year of our additional census dollars, so I felt like we needed to at least keep that around the 2.9 million. State income tax, which is the hall tax, that tax is actually phasing out over the next few years, so I'm kind of dropping that, lowering that each year until it phases out. I think we have just a couple more years left on that hall tax. State beer tax, we've been collecting around 15,000, so I went ahead and budgeted again 15,000. And the state alcohol beverage tax, Lynn, this happens to me all day long.
You're both on the Wi-Fi now, so it's going to be.
Okay.
You're to the second computer this time.
All right. State alcohol beverage tax. Anticipated about 10,000. The state gasoline inspection fee, it runs around the mid-60s, low 70s, so we estimated about 65,000. And the state street contract maintenance, which is our reimbursement for TDOT for mowing and litter pickup, that's a contract is pretty much the same every year, $4,220. Moving on down to our next section. This mouse doesn't like me. Okay, so let's just go down this way manually. These are mostly Parks and Rec fees. We have, well, we also have some transient fees. The first line item is the 34120, which is fees and commissions. That's our transient fees and permits that outsiders come in and get permits for. I estimated about $4,000. For our league fees, we've got a contract with the current ball league to collect about $8,000 for next year, and should receive about $8,000 for this year. Recreation fees, those are pavilion fees and some miscellaneous fees. We estimated about $1,000 on that one. We don't have concessions anymore. Field rentals, anticipated about $500 on field rentals, and then on the multipurpose building, we do pretty well there. We collect somewhere in the neighborhood of around 12,000 plus on that. This mouse just does not like me. Alrighty. Moving on down. to our next section, which is libraries. For library fines and penalties, we anticipated for 2019-20 about $2,000. For donations, about 500. Copies, we anticipate about 6,500. Fax copies, around 5,000. We have lost books, we budgeted 300. Lost cards, 100. Sales of used books, about $100. And the children's program, we anticipate collecting about $100. Going on down to the next section is our court fines. Okay, it either don't work or it works too fast. For our city court fines and cost, you see we sorry y'all, this mouse is not liking me. Okay, maybe. I don't know. Lena, this is a, I'm gonna have to, I guess, because it's, okay, let's go down, we were down. Court fines, we're estimating about 300,000 in city court fines, and then the Rutherford County fines, we're estimating about 45,000, and then in the state of Tennessee, we're estimating about 5,000. And these are all numbers that are based on prior year's trends. If you see anything that just looks really off the wall, you know, you can get with me and we can talk about adjusting anything, but rather be a little bit conservative than over budget for the revenues too much. Our next section of revenues, interest earnings, we anticipate earning about $17,000 in interest off of the general fund money. We do, of course, when you see the gov deals on request for surplus items, we budget a little bit for those surplus items here. We budgeted $1,500 for the general items, about $4,000 for fixed assets, about $1,500 for police supplies, and about $4,000 for police fixed assets.
That's one where really each year you don't know
You don't
what's
know.
gonna be in there.
You don't know, because you can see in prior years, some years we've had, you know,
Fluctuates quite a bit.
if we sell a fire truck, or, you know, we're gonna get more revenue obviously than normal. The next line item is our GHSO grant. It's our Governor's Highway Safety. We generally get this grant every year. We're anticipating about $15,000 for next year. We asked for 65. Okay. All right. Contributions to the Old Timers Festival, we're estimating about 10,000. Contributions to the pageant, we're estimating about 2,000. Contributions to the fire department, this one will probably change based on that new grant, Chris. But I budgeted what we normally get, which is $300 a year. This is from that guy down the street. And then we estimated about $50 for fire training revenue. This is from the classes that are non-city employee classes that we received a little bit of revenue on. Other financing sources, this is basically if we get any kind of a rebate or a refund or an overpayment or any kind of miscellaneous income or revenue in, that's what this line item here is for, the $36,900. And then we also get a $500 right away from Windstream each year. And then we usually generate a little bit of money from recycling activities. We estimated about $500. So that gives us an estimated total revenue of $22,537,970. Any questions on revenues before we jump over to expenses? And you'll notice at the bottom of the page, and I mean, this is the sad part, I think. The expenses for 19 and 20 in total are going to be, as right now, just the operating without any capital. Our expenditures are about $21,734,400. So that leaves us with a surplus right now of $803,000, $803,570. Okay, we'll switch right over here to our expenses. If I can give my computer a minute here to catch up. Glenn? Okay, here we go.
If only IT was here.
Thank goodness. It wasn't mouse, it was the system just hung up. Okay, we're gonna start with the first department, which is legislative board. And I just wanna, I mean, we can, to save a little bit of time, you'll notice that pretty much the budget numbers are the same from one year to the next. The only difference you'll see in the legislative is the health insurance, and the reason that there's such an increase there is because with the past administration, we had two people that were not under the family coverage plan, and now we have two people, those two people now have family coverage, so. That's about the only change for the legislative.
It's like food went down as well.
The judicial stayed exactly the same. We still have, you know, they get no increases or anything like that, so theirs is stayed the same, exactly the same. City court, about the only change you'll see here is a 3% wage increase. This model does have a 3% wage increase for all employees, which is based on our step system. It moves every employee up a step unless there's special circumstances. So only about a $3,000, a little over, not quite a $4,000 difference there. City administrator, only change you'll see there is, of course, wages. And I want to talk a little bit about line item 129, which is the allocation. And what that is where we allocate funds from, like, city administrator. The city administrator takes care of all funds, all departments throughout the city, which is, you know, the general fund, the water sewer fund, the stormwater fund. So we allocate some of those expenses throughout all of the city so that, you know, the general fund is not absorbing all of the costs of the city administrator. And you'll see some of that within other departments where we allocate some of the wages, spread them out over different departments. Other than the 3% increase, we took down the meals and entertainment, which is basically the food for the retreat. We took it down a little bit because we're not going off-site anymore. We're doing everything here at City Hall. So, and then looks like a machinery rental equipment, we took it down by $100. On the city recorder, the only change here is the 3% wage increase. On the tax administration, you know, we did have some big changes here. First of all, we don't have to budget again for reappraisals, so that's about $250-something thousand there that we won't have to rebudget this year. And then, of course, this department only has one employee this year for 1920. For the finance department, again, this is another department that gets allocated out to other departments because we take care of, you know, a lot of the banking for the stormwater and the water sewer fund. So, and we actually do a lot of reconciling, we do a lot of postings, so we allocate some of our funds out throughout the city. Other than that, I took up the accounting audit services, about $500, and I took up the repair and maintenance because with our new next-gen software, the annual maintenance is a little bit higher than the previous annual maintenance. Also reduced machinery and equipment and rental. Of course, you know, Felicia rebid the copiers and printers, and we're getting better rates now. And did increase the bank service charges because we're seeing those trend upward a little bit. Okay. Human resources. This one, we have our wage increase. We have, we increased the target, increased the employee education and training by $1,000. We increased the membership registration fees by $200. We increased the professional services by $12,000, and that is for Civic Plus annual maintenance agreement. And then the $100,000 that's in there, that is just for potential legal fees. We hope to, we hope not to have to use those, but we always budget in HR a line item to cover any unforeseen legal activity. That, it was all of the changes for HR. For engineering, we did not rebudget the other wages. That was where we had an employee in economic development that we were splitting over several departments. So that will not be done this year. All of those wages will be captured in the economic development department. Other than that, we increased the employee education and training by $100, increased electricity by $500, decreased meals and entertainment by $250, increased small items of equipment by $3,000, and decreased fuel by $300, and decreased machinery and equipment rental by $500.
What was the thought on the small equipment increase?
That is for a master file.
Okay.
For the large blueprints, is that right, Adam?
That's correct. It's a vertical storage solution for 24 by 36 prints. Since all of our records are kept in the stormwater building, which is about to come off lease next year, I have to have some way to move them. So putting them in a waterproof, fireproof case is about the best I can come up with.
Thank you.
When I sat down with the departments and talked about their needs, if there was anything that we just absolutely couldn't get around or wasn't big enough to be a capital item, we went ahead and increased the line items. If it was known things like, if a maintenance agreement went up, or this right here, we know that he's got to have storage space, so it was kind of like we knew we were going to have it regardless of what we do with the budget. Okay, for IT, so we have our, annual, have our average 3% increase. We did increase the subscriptions to, which is where we budget for the yearly domains and the online services, virus protectors. I think this is year, Glenn, if I'm not mistaken, we have the $16,000 renewal on the virus protector.
What line is that?
That is line 233.
Yes, that's where all our yearly maintenance comes out for switches, firewalls, any kind of
And we have the,
yearly maintenance, yeah.
and we have the virus protector that's renewed every 3 years, and that one hits
Yes.
this year. So
Yeah.
that's why that line item has gone up
Yeah, we
so
get
much.
a much better deal if we do the 3-year. They give us a deep discount, so we do the 3-year on that one.
We increased the phones by 10,000 because if you look at the prior year's trending, we're trending upward every year a little bit. We've got more smartphones, more smartphone services. Under repair and maintenance, we increased that by 15,000, 15.5, and that's to cover some additional work from Turner Security.
Yeah, that's where I take all the surveillance, DVRs, cameras, laserfish maintenance also comes out of that, the yearly maintenance for our laserfish document system. Majority of that is for laserfish, I think.
I don't know, I did lower the Microsoft license because we spread that out over several different departments, and we had actually been over budgeting in prior years. You can kind of ignore that forecast, because that's just a forecast. That wasn't the actual number for the current year. So I think 30,000 will cover us for next year. Planning. Again, this is one of the departments where we were splitting some wages that we're no longer going to split anymore. We have a 3% increase. We reduced the other professional services because the transportation study is done now, to my knowledge. And we were able to reduce that line item. And we increased the, you'll see line item 720, it says grants, donations. That's actually some of our nonprofits, RTA and GNRC. That number is not an exact number yet. We still have some tweaking to do on our nonprofits. What I did is I went ahead and put what we budgeted last year. I added just a little bit, but after talking to Bruce, I think we probably will have to adjust that a little bit more. And we'll talk about that as when we get into nonprofits. Next department is our codes. You'll notice that I want to talk about line item 126. You'll notice that that one is going up quite a bit, and I just want to kind of point out that in the previous year, what we budgeted, we only budgeted for half a year for one new hire. So this is a full year for a new person for next year. That's why that line item has gone up. We haven't added anybody. We just added a half a year, basically. Of course, health insurance changed quite a bit, you know, based on if we have someone that we hire somebody that has family coverage, whereas somebody previously had individual coverage. That makes a big change. Looks like we had a couple of those, or maybe at least one of those, that changed status on that. Let's see what else we changed. We increased the line item 313 for books from 18 to 4,500, and that's to cover the new code books. I guess that's municipal. Is that municipal code?
Building code.
Building code.
Building code. We increased operating supplies just a little bit by $200 to cover miscellaneous increases for Cytex and other miscellaneous expenses. We increased the fuel by $300. And that is it for codes. Next department is our city hall, and we did not make any changes in city hall. Left everything. Actually, we did make a change. Sorry about that. NES poll fees are going up, so I had to increase the NES poll fees, and the repair and maintenance service, we added $2,000 to repair and maintenance. And the next department is the police department. We have our 3%. We have our 3% wage increase. We have an employee, you'll see a bonus pay and a longevity pay. We have 2 employees within the city that have topped out for their, in their pay scale, which means they have met, is it 12 steps or 11? I can't remember. 12. They are at the top of their grade and step. So when that happens, they get a lump sum bonus that year. Health insurance is down a little bit, and that's based on if we hire an officer, like I said before, whether they have family or individual coverage, it changes with that dynamic. Employee education training, we took it down a little bit over prior year because in prior year we had some training in there for new officers, so that comes down. We added a little bit to vehicle maintenance due to the aging of vehicles, which is line item 261. We added a little bit to meals and per diem. We added extra $1,000 there. We added $2,500 to office supplies. We lowered the operating supplies by $4,000, and we lowered the food by $250. And we increased clothing and uniforms by $5,000. And we increased a K-9 unit by $500. And that's pretty much all the changes we made to the police department. That's a pretty large department, so if anybody has any questions. Fire department. You're not going to see a whole lot of changes in wages here. We did move some things around. We took some funds out of the hourly, which is where our PRNs are budgeted. We took half of the PRN money and added it to overtime. Chris is going to work on that to do some restructuring and manipulate some schedules. We did have the some restructuring that was approved in this budget year that carries over into next year. We've added took a position and added it into 2 positions. We reduced the employee education and training because I think we've gotten all of our training done there for AEMTs, pretty much.
Yeah, but it'll come back later.
Later this year, or later this fiscal year, or?
It will be, you'll come back and see it when we talk about stipend or
Okay.
in capital.
Yeah.
You meant later on tonight.
No, we're not doing capital.
That's capital, yeah.
We're not doing the increases in 2 weeks. Unless you want to stay late tonight. Line item 235, we did increase that by $4,000. That's for the renewal increases, some EMT increases, or EMT renewals. We increased repair and maintenance by $5,000. We increased repair and maintenance on vehicles by $5,000. We increased travel by $2,000. We increased meals associated with travel by $2,500. And we increased clothing about almost $8,000, and then we increased fuel by about $5,000. And we decreased our grant contribution, which that's kind of an unknown number. We just try to put something in there in case we do get a matching grant. We'll have some money set aside for any kind of a match. Any questions on the fire department or police department? Those are pretty big departments. And you're always welcome to call or email me, after you've looked over these, because sometimes you don't think about questions right now, maybe later. Emergency services. We have $3,000 set aside for employee education and training. That's kind of a first responder type training. We have some, actually didn't change any of the line items in this department. The $5,000 is for annual maintenance on the, do we still have the lightning detection?
Yes.
Annual maintenance on the lightning detection. Then we have some of our nonprofits built in here. We will discuss those, so don't let those numbers scare you. They are not set in stone numbers. They are just there so that we can kind of keep the same numbers flowing, and we'll look at nonprofits at the end. and probably have a little discussion on those tonight, since I think we're gonna have some time. Highways and streets. Not a lot of changes here. We did add, we added 5,000 to repair and maintenance on roads and streets. We added 2,500 to repair and maintenance on the building. We added about 500 for, on uniforms. And that's about it, other than wage increases. And whenever you hear me say that I've added something, it's just because either in the forecast or in the prior year, we're trending a little bit higher, and we're trying to adjust for that. Because when you have a changeover in people, or you add people, sometimes the line items just need to be adjusted. If we added anybody to highways and streets for, obviously uniforms are gonna go up, and other things that are associated, clothing, boots. Fleet maintenance. I don't think we didn't, let's see, we lowered the maintenance, the fleet maintenance on the maintenance department, because I guess we can take that out now and add that to Parks and Rec. That's one thing I didn't take that out. Let me fix that right quick. Let me see if there's anything else. We increased the fire department by 2,500, which I know they have a line item in their budget also for repair and maintenance on vehicles, but also there's sometimes some supplies. It may be an oil change or something that the fleet department absorbs that cost in their department. Small items of equipment, we increased that by 3,000. And
You said we can take 281 out completely, right?
Yes.
yes, I moved that one up to Parks
Park
and
and
Rec.
Rec.
Our next department is actually culture, which is another area where we have nonprofits. We'll discuss those. We kind of have nonprofits in several different areas based on where they match up the best at. Parks and Rec. Parks and Rec and maintenance have been combined. In the overall picture on the, I did combine the previous year's forecast, the actuals and everything, so that you can kind of have a broad picture of what, where we're changing at. One of the major changes was in the first line item, which was salaried employees. We had a salaried employee in this department last year, and we changed the job description, and it's no longer a salaried position. So that's why you see a big change there. It's now an hourly position, and that's how you can see the hourly is bumped up and the salary went down. We did have a request to add the 5,500 for the pageant expense in here, so we've increased that. Other than that, we did increase the repair and maintenance by 5,000. We increased repair and maintenance on grounds by 7,000, and that's for, field dirt and prepping fields, keeping them in good shape. We did lower the office supplies and materials by, looks like 10,000. We must have had something last year in there, a large item that we took out, because it's down to normal now. You can see in prior years we're around the $6,000 to $7,000 mark. We did increase the operating supplies. And we increased, programs by 2,000, and that is it for that department. In the library, you'll see that we, of course, we have our 3% increase for wages. And then, looking on down through here, I don't see any other increases. Economic development, like I said earlier, we now have that full-time position. We're not allocating that position out to any other departments. We added a $500 clothing allowance. I think we talked about that at the retreat, Tom did. We decreased the business, decreased printing and stationery, because obviously we won't be printing like business cards over again, so I think Tom has got some of his printing needs established. We did increase the travel, because Tom is doing a lot more traveling to go into more conferences. We increased the meals associated with that. And then the ICSC, we increased that a little bit, about 2,300. And that's is that mainly to keep up our booth presentations and? Yeah. Okay. Small items of equipment, we did put 500 in there.
And this is one we talked about last year as being one that we're still kind of learning those trends, as having a full-time, dedicated economic development department.
Yeah, it'll take us several years to get this one down pat.
Those like they travel to, one was going last year with the exception of recon, and now we're going to be going to shows.
That was all the increases for economic development. Public relations. The public relations also covers our Channel 3. So we have added $6,600 for the electronics and infomercials and Adobe. We reduced the PR budget by $8,000 because we were going to. The reason we did that was to cover some of the additional line items that we were increasing. So we took 8 out of the PR and added some to that membership and registration fees. We took it also. I'm sorry, maybe I'm wrong. We took it some out for this advertising, which is $14,000, which is a new line item. I guess our biggest increase is the Channel 3 equipment. We had budgeted in 18-19, but this, we had budgeted $100,000, but this is a $200,000 project. We were going to budget $100 in 18-19 and $100 in 19-20, but it's not feasible to do that because all the equipment has to be bought at one time. So hopefully we can get that up and going right after the 1st of July.
Jerry will be very excited with that.
Yes.
He's listening
From the cheap seats.
from the way out in the cheap seats.
The next section is our debt service, which is all of our bond payments, principals and interest for our general fund, GO bonds. And I haven't, you can't see it on your copy, but I also have the date out to the side of when those bonds expire. You know, there's just your typical increases or decreases. If you have any questions about any of those, please let me know. Oh, in an overall scheme of things, we only went up about about $1,500, looks like, for the total debt service. And the last section of our general fund is the operating transfers. And this is our normal, we transfer $30,000 to the drug fund every year, and we transfer $55,000 to the senior fund.
So here's where the seniors, budget is established right here, senior citizen.
That's the general fund portion that we contribute to the,
Okay.
this is all of the operating changes. In 2 weeks from today, we'll discuss additional operating expenses, and we'll discuss the capital items that have been requested by each department. I have sent you all a preliminary copy. I may have a couple of more changes to that, and I will send you all those out as those, whenever I finish those up. And again, as we talked when we're on the revenue sheet, that our expenses are $21,734. And it won't let me pull that up. And our revenues were 22. It's hung up again. Our revenues were 22,537, and that leaves us with $803,570 in surplus. I'm going to pull up the nonprofit list right quick. We can talk about that for a few minutes, and we can discuss. We could go over this list. You all have had a copy. Look at it for a couple of days. Rutherford County EMS, that typically goes up as the director's pay goes up. Box 100 has requested. Box 100 has requested $25,000 this year instead of $15,000. Rescue Squad has requested $25,000. I don't think I have gotten all of the rest of the Rescue Squad. Do you remember seeing if I gave you any additional information on them?
No, there was just a email from Dana saying
Had
here.
a sickness in the family, and they're a little bit
Yeah.
behind. I will reach out to them one more time, but I think at this point we've reached out to all of these several times, and we still have yet to hear from a couple of these. The Chamber, they have not increased any of theirs. RTA, we've got some pretty good numbers from RTA, other than the annual subscription fee I think we pay, plus the RTA Transit Authority. GNRC, they normally don't submit their request. I think their budget runs a little bit different from ours. We will get something from them, but it may be later on. Last year, they requested $12,530. I have reached out to them, have not heard from them. I'll try one more time before we finalize this. Rutherford County Health Department has submitted theirs, the same as before. Rutherford County Paws, they have requested $35,000. They have requested funds in the past. You just don't see it on this spreadsheet because we didn't allocate anything to them. MCHRA, they have Mid-Cumberland. They have added a youth program. They have added this a couple of years ago. We didn't participate in that last year. You can see some of their nonprofit requests have gone up. Last year they had also went up, but we kind of stuck to the same thing as what we've been doing. Smyrna-Laverne Assistance Coalition. Chief, I don't know if you know anything about them.
What?
The Smyrna-Laverne Assistance Coalition?
No, I don't. That's not out.
No, that's not yours, never mind. The Smyrna-Laverne Assistance Coalition is the organization that helps citizens with, for instance, they can't pay their utility bills. I have reached out to them twice. I don't know if they've changed staff, and the email address I have is outdated. Smyrna-Laverne Food Bank has requested $5,000. We've been giving them $3,500. The CASA of Rutherford County, they've requested $3,000. We generally give them $1,500. Child advocacy, we give them $8,000 out of the general fund, and then we give them an additional $7,000 out of the police department, out of the drug fund. Right, Chief?
Yes, that's correct.
And Motlow has requested 25. That's a new one this year. Laverne Boxing has requested 15. Generally, we had been giving them 5. Last year, we went up to 10. This year, they're asking for 15. Crime Stoppers, I believe it's been a couple of years since they've requested anything, but they have requested 2,500. And then Carpe Artista has requested 11,500. That is, basically, that is all that we have to go over today. I advise you to start looking over the nonprofits. You can make your recommendations. You can discuss them now. Ultimately, it'll be the mayor that will decide, who gets what. But if you have any that you want to come in and speak at the third workshop.
I think we need to have a look at the RTA. I went last week,
Yep.
or the week before, to the regional, basically their South Conference with Mayor Kitchen and town manager for Smyrna. We were able to find out we have a total of 63, or an average of 63 riders for fall and winter 2018-19.
Do you know what it was in the previous years?
They do not.
Was that from Laverne or from?
That's just Laverne. We have one stop with them. They do 2 routes, number 86 and 96. For 86, it's averaging 36. For 96, it's averaging 27. That's a big concern that was discussed across the board that Smyrna, Murfreesboro, and MTSU are all looking at, is as far as, how that money is being allocated and used.
I have a question on Laverne Boxing too. Have they given any explanation why their budget is requested more and more each year?
Nothing other than, I believe they're, Chief, do you know anything about the boxing? I believe they said the rent has gone up. And, they're doing a lot more activities with their members. They're, doing some traveling and just overall growing.
I've actually been down there and helped them work on that building. It is, to put it in layman terms that everybody can understand, it's about like Public Works. So it needs a lot of TLC, but, we've been trying to get some volunteers down there to help, and they've got a great program. They've got a lot of kids in there that would otherwise be on the streets, so.
Yeah, I think they do have a great program. I just noticed that of all the other increases are kind of smaller.
Yeah.
But this is going from 5,000 to 10,000. Now they're requesting 15,000. That seems pretty aggressive in the last 3 years to triple, basically.
Well,
not that they're not worth it or they're not doing a good job.
Absolutely.
It's just it's a lot.
Me being the new kid on the block here, I don't know which one of these, I know a couple of them for sure, but I guess I'm just gonna have to get down and gritty and study about them and see which one of these benefit Laverne. Obviously we love our county, but let's be realistic, we want to benefit Laverne, number one, so. Like with Paul's, has never asked for nothing, and they're asking for 35,000.
Oh, they've
Well, no,
asked.
they've been asking every year. That's how much we've allocated, is
okay.
nothing. They also get funding through the county, which is one of
Right,
the,
and that's why I said I
main
need to
reasons.
study up on these things, because all I got.
And the reason you don't see that on here is because what I give you on here is what we actually budgeted.
Okay,
You'll see the column that I have for 1920 says requested, and then I have another column that says budget. I will hide that requested column next year so that you won't see that. And so you'll only see what we truly actually budgeted for.
And I've talked to Chris Clark, I've talked to, Mr. Brinkley, talked a little bit to Chief Walker. This $25,000, I mean, I don't, unless you all can tell me something, I don't know of anything that the rescue squad does.
Well, I can speak to that. And Tom can probably tell you more information if he'd be willing to, but they more than offset their costs just by helping us with the census. They were pretty involved in that process and had volunteered quite a few hours. And that, Phyllis, do you know approximately how much money that helped the city bring in from state tax revenues?
Overall, the census brought in, was it somewhere around 200, Bruce?
I think it was. I don't remember the exact
It's
number.
a little over 200.
Just with that effort alone, they helped the city bring in $200,000.
I just go by what the emergency people tell me. But, I guess we'll vote on that as a board. I'm just trying to look at it as far as what have they actually done to help our emergency services.
Well, I think when you think of any volunteer, I don't think that you focus on any one particular area, because I think that you can be useful in a variety of different ways to the community, and not just, the city's comprised of more than just emergency services. So
Absolutely, 100% agreed. But I'd like to see people that are doing things instead of one time a year. I'd like to see them doing it.
But if that one time a year brings in $200,000, how is that not exceptional?
I think that for that particular deal, and Tom and I talked about it, it's a great thing. Are there other options with that to where it doesn't cost the city $25,000? I don't know. Like I said, I got to look into it. I'm only going based on what the emergency people have told me about that. And
Well, one thing I would say is, Bruce, what night is it that we have allocated for the nonprofits that this board wants to talk with, for them to come in?
Typically, we do that at the third workshop, which will be 2 weeks from tonight.
Okay, well, then I would say everyone would want to get which ones you want to see over to Bruce to come in, and we can have some discussions on the funding. 'Cause as it sits, I believe we've got $258,000 in requests.
And we only budgeted, probably, and about all that we have, that I have built into the budget right now is about 175. So that would mean another 100, if we gave everybody that's on this list something, what they requested, we would have to take away $125,000 from our 800 that we have left.
absolutely. I try to look at it, I guess I got a soft spot for emergency services, and with police and fire. I know that, I could let the chief of each department answer. If you had to put a dollar amount on the, what they're worth, how much would Box 100 be worth to the city? It's my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Clark, but I talked to Ricky McCormick a couple years ago, God rest his soul, and the city of Laverne has to have a rehab unit for fires and stuff. Is that a true statement? And the reason he told me that was because if the fire department had to hire their own rehab, or not, well, yeah, hired, come to work for the fire department, by the time they pay for trucks and all the emergency stuff and everything that Box 100 offers, it would cost well to $250,000 just to get it started. not to mention the salaries and things like that, because it has to be run 24/7. Now, that's kind of a sketchy thing of what the former chief told me. Is that something?
No, sir, that's somewhat accurate. According to an FPA standard, we should have a rehab unit there on the scene. So let's just take Box 100. I look at them as part of the team. They make sure that our personnel are hydrated, the essentials that they need on long-term scenes. I think that they saved the city thousands of dollars in workman's comp issues. They are out every large event, house fire such as that. They provide other services that are needed here within the city, such as, I'll let the chief speak about helping with traffic. They're a tremendous asset to the city. I don't know of any other place that provides the service that they provide, and we're very blessed and gracious for them. I couldn't put a number on that. I would tell you that we would probably have to gain personnel in those aspects, as far as just making sure that our emergency workers are hydrated appropriately and making sure that they have the essential needs while on those scenes, such as fluids, long-term events, food, just different items such as that. They also are certified in certain other emergency response areas, such as what we call a federal standard called CERT, Citizens Emergency Response Team. So when we say something as far as terminology and how to perform those duties, they know it. We look at also emergency services as far as a disaster response. We look at the Emergency Operations Center and a representative that would be in there under volunteer services. Currently, we're working with Box into developing a volunteer service provider. So we wouldn't want to bring all the volunteers to City Hall because we have normal operating duties. We wouldn't want to bring them to the Emergency Operations Center because it would overload that area. We wouldn't want to send them to the command post because it would overload that. So we segregate those teams, volunteer team being churches, volunteers, all these with chainsaws, and they would organize that as well. Temporary sheltering, we already have that in order. Temporary sheltering may be a flash flood. It displaces a few victims in a local area. We provide them a quick-term shelter, and we don't have to make this a big ordeal and ship them to Murfreesboro. So they provide that service as well. Very valuable to the city. I couldn't put you a number on it, but they're there, they're working. They make tons of calls. I talk to them regularly. Relationships are everything when it starts that disaster process. And that's been ongoing. I'll let Chief Walker speak on his police department.
They also assist us when we have events where we have numbers of people who are doing typical law enforcement duties, whether it's a long-term crime scene or we have folks that are barricaded and we have to negotiate. They also assist us when we do training for those things for our negotiators and SWAT as well. They're providing fluids, whether it's cold weather and heat to warm up and a hot drink, or whether it's hot weather and it's cooling and cold drink, plus snacks. They have also, where we had a long term of several hours, where they also provided food. They send out and get pizza or burgers or whatever, something to eat as well, where we had those. When we have a parade, it's all hands on deck for the most part. Pretty much everybody we have at the PD, if it wasn't for them helping us with traffic at many points where we would have to station a couple of officers, if we didn't have them, that saves us a tremendous amount of overtime money from that part, even though it costs us a lot to do a parade, no matter what, or 5K. They help us at National Night Out. They help us at other such events as that. They help us when it's cold and when it's hot with our testing during our agility testing, bringing fluids, et cetera, not only for the applicants, but for our folks too. Pretty much about anything that we try to do, if we ask them for help, we have help.
Chief, I remember this, and AC, you may remember this from this past Howl at the Moon 5K, right by Merchandise Liquidators. We had a gentleman who just decided the cones don't really mean anything and crossed right over to where we were running. And they were able to get him stopped before he actually plowed into a friend of mine.
Yes.
And myself. So we were right there.
So basically, it sounds to me like, and ju- their volunteer work with emergency services, park and recs are, they're gonna be there. They've been all over me, making sure that, you know, but, I think in my opinion, again, I think the census is good. How often do we do a census?
We did one in '08 or '07, and then we just did one. That was as far as our special censuses, the
Right.
federal
We can
ones.
we can do up to 4 between each federal census.
Right,
We've
but-
only done one in the last, this last 10 years.
Right, so their, participation compared to Box 100's participation, yes, they saved the city money, I agree. But I think that in this particular case, there's really not even it's not even in the same ballpark with what Box 100 does for the city and for emergency services.
To be honest, and I don't mean to speak out of terms, but you take that amount of money that they're asking for, that money goes back to your employees and to the citizens of this town.
Yes, it does.
And that's a very small amount for the job that you're receiving. I view that as that small amount that we're providing for Box 100 translates going right back to your employees.
So I have a question kind of along this line, and just a question more that I know the answer to, but I'm just going to go ahead and phrase the question. How many times has Rescue Squad been invited to dance? In other words, how many times have the two short-staffed emergency services departments
They are
Request.
included every time we have one of those events.
on their
where we-
radio?
Where we need that. Email.
On email?
They have their own email address. Sergeant Davis has invited several times, and nobody show up. Last year, we asked for assistance for Carry the Load when they came. And we got about halfway here, and there was a vehicle waiting at the post office, but it got out and got in the parade rather than assisting with helping. I'm not being mean, I'm not being critical, but we have invited, and we've had virtually no response for 2 or 3 years.
They also haven't been contacted for assistance in several years. Not talking about the parades and stuff like that, but
We don't call Box to assist us, like in a search, et cetera. They come to assist from the standpoint of rehab, et cetera. When we call them for assistance, they come. And they're all included, both of them are included on the emails.
So, what is the starting salary for one police officer?
What is it, Phyllis? What's this year's?
36,
Is it-
plus benefits.
Salary and benefits is about 70.
About 70 plus turnout gear and,
Well,
The-
training and equipment, it's 100 some odd vehicle, et cetera.
right. So, for a flat $50,000, we have volunteers that could come from either organization. And, you know, I don't understand why it happened that these two nonprofits are always pitted against one another. I'm not saying, I'm saying that
I'm
in
not
general,
pitting,
not, no.
honestly. You
I
asked
don't-
me a question and I was
Right,
honest.
and I'm just saying in general to the room. They're two separate organizations with two different philosophies, two different purposes. And to compare them is just not a whole lot different than comparing the RTA to the Smyrna Laverne Assistance Coalition. They're two different missions, two different organizations. And so I think that's really unfair to continue to compare them. Now, I know that we had talked in the past about utilizing their services for search and rescue of missing persons. Has any of that happened?
No, we spoke, and then that conversation just kind of faded off. No, the last time that we called for them was in 2017 in November, and come to find out they wasn't trained in those areas that they implied that they were. And the reason I know that is because I got their certifications. With that being said, I can't afford to put people in positions that they're not trained for that particular area. The only thing that I know of currently that group is certified in was probably vehicle extrication. We provide that service every day. At no point have we really, the only time that I've called for mutual aid since that event, I don't recall of any. That was a water rescue situation or water rescue evacuation. We took care of it by Rutherford County SORT. I will tell you that we have increased our capabilities and we're taking care of that ourselves now. I can't give you a time when we last called for their services.
Are they not BLS certified?
That I don't know. Those conversations, and I think the chief can back us up, there's, unless we reach out to them.
My understanding of the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is in a situation where either volunteer service is called, the agency that's in charge would be the fire department or the police department. I mean, they come to volunteer, and it's up to the fire department or police department to say, I want you to go to position A, you position, you are to take charge and do what you're supposed to do there. I'm just verbalizing my understanding on that. I'm not going to ask any particular questions because I'm going to wait until Wednesday so I can have both parties here. I don't like one-sided
And I think that's the fair approach.
Yeah, and that would be the best approach on that. But my understanding, as it stood a couple of years ago, is we, and when I say we, I do know that Mayor Waldron went and he gave them an ultimatum. He said, you're going to have to, speaking of the rescue squad, you're going to have to do more. You're going to have to start doing something. You need to let me know you need to let him know when you're not being called if there is a need. And like you said, it just sort of disappeared. I mean, I don't understand exactly what happened with that, but I'm the type person that if I'm paying for something or if I'm authorized payment to be made on something, then we need to follow up on it. So I think we've had a lack of communication on some of these, and that needs to be addressed. And again, I'll have a list of questions that will be asked, so I can go to either party, and we'll see exactly where the disconnect came in, because there was a disconnect. and there is a disconnect
And
somehow,
that disconnect's been going on for some time.
before me.
Right.
And me too.
Before me, so I,
Yeah, and him.
yeah,
So-
so that's my understanding, but, you know, that's basically part of the job too, is to try to make it a little bit better. And, you know, in response to my colleague here, yeah, they are volunteers, and yes, there are multiple hours that Box 100 put in, and we're grateful for that. But, you know, given the census that I brought into discussion for us to do a special census, if you can, anytime that you can clock a $200,000 ticket off of that, I think that's extremely good. That's extremely good.
I agree.
So I have no problem either way, but again, I would like to have all
One of
our
the-
participants here, and I'd like to see everyone discuss this, and let's get it out and get it on the record as to what's going on. Because like I said, it was way before I came, and, you know, with the grace of God, maybe it'll stop after we figure out what's going on.
One of the things that sticks in my craw probably more than just about anything is, as Vice Mayor Brown said, that they're two kind of totally different entities. But one of the things that Chief Clark, if he will, tell us, because I went and asked questions to everybody, and whether Box 100 or whether the rescue squad have different titles and what have you, when it comes to emergency services, everybody should jump in and do their part, whether it be doing this or doing that. So if I'm not mistaken, Chief Clark, the comment was made that we need the rescue squad to take care of the water for the firefighters on this particular episode and take water to them, and the reply to you was what?
I'm not sure exactly what.
We're not water boys.
Yes.
Is that true?
That was what was replied back to
That's
me.
what was replied back to you directly. So things like that kind of stick in my craw, because basically what that's doing is that's putting yourself above what needs to be done. And no matter how minute the job is, whether it's bringing water or bringing a ambulance, if it's going to help someone save some lives and stuff, you know, you need to be on it. And it's little things like that, it just sticks in my craw, so.
I think that's a good point. There are certain things that cause me pause too. One is the fact that Box 100 was founded by a former board member of this board, and that's probably why it's always brought up in a political fashion, although Box 100 is a wonderful organization also. Rescue Squad, one of the members of this board is a former volunteer who ended up suing the Rescue Squad and seems to have an axe to grind. There seems to be some tension behind the scenes, and I'm not really sure if we can address that in the scope of this meeting. But they're both politically connected to various members of the board for various reasons. And I think that's why every year we spend, in a $20 million budget, we spend an hour or so talking about these two nonprofits instead of what the city's really here to do. We talked about $20 million and never even mentioned it, but when we bring up $25,000, now we want to have an issue. I don't understand this.
So Bruce, at this point, I'm gonna say that from all parties, Box and Rescue, we will want them here to have a discussion with. If anyone wants any other parties from this list, please make sure to send that over to Bruce, and we can bring those groups in and have those discussions.
I'd like to ask a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The point that you brought up on RTA, I was not aware of that, and I would definitely like to discuss that further and have someone here, because that makes no sense either.
Yes.
So I would like to have someone here to discuss that, and, because if you're paying $30-something thousand for 66 people to ride, that makes no sense. Let's just buy them
That-
cars.
Well, that's the average per day.
Per day, correct.
let's
It's about
just buy 'em a car.
16,300 something per year. So it's about $2 per person that you're paying per
Yeah,
rider.
we need to have them here too.
I absolutely agree with that. Yes, Chief Walker.
If you're gonna bring somebody else in too, bring Paul's, the reason, and I'll say this, Tom's here, he was on the board previously and was a part of it when the city stopped, because we would have vicious dogs loose. We would have injuries from vicious dogs loose. And we would call, and either Paul's would not show up, or they'd show up an hour and a half, 2 hours later. And I can't remember what it was, Bruce may remember, but I believe it was about 35,000 or so dollars. But to be honest with you, we weren't getting our fair share, because every single person in this room that lives here in Laverne also funds Paul's through our county taxes. So I'll say it as a taxpayer and as an employee. Take a good look at what you got and ask them to come in and what they're gonna do for us, because we've had major issues in the past with them responding to.
Even with us being a donator to their thing, we still not
Back when
getting-
they were getting
We're still not getting-
donations, we struggled. That's why the donations decreased and then stopped,
Okay.
is my understanding. I've been here through those meetings, and
I'm glad you spoke up. Those are the things I personally need to know.
I'm not saying don't fund them,
No.
but
I understand.
we were trying to hold their feet to the fire, did it for years, and, you know, sometimes they come, sometimes they don't.
Well, having less than $1 million to work with in surplus funds, that requires everything to be looked at a very tough level.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I call this meeting adjourned.
Call it.